Hello and welcome to the Mr. Brown podcast, where I reflect on my ongoing experiences as a teacher, with a special focus on mental health. I am your host, James Brown. Salutations. It's been a long old time since I did an episode of the podcast. Just having a look back, it was last September was the last time I did an episode. So it's August now, almost a year later. Now I remember posting that I was going to take a little break from the podcast for a while, although I didn't anticipate it being this long. But a lot has happened since then. So I originally said that I was going to take a short break from the podcast while I settled into my new work life. So I was dropping down from full-time teaching to part-time teaching with only one class, one Year 11 class, the class that I'd had as Year 10 the year before. So I took them through into Year 11. But they have been my only maths class this past year. And the rest of the time, I've been doing my PhD research. So I've almost swapped. For the 3 years prior to that, I had been a full-time teacher and a part-time master's student. Now I'm a full-time PhD student and a part-time teacher. So it's kind of switched. And I said I wanted to take a break from the podcast so that I could, settle into my new routine and get my head around the PhD. And that took a little bit longer than I thought. And lots of other things have happened as well. So we've recently, well, not that recently, but we've moved into our first home. More recently, we've gotten a dog as well. So, lots has been happening. And the hiatus lasted longer than I had originally planned. But I'm here. I'm back. I'd like to get back into a regular routine of posting episodes of the podcast. Now, I should say a little bit more. I mean, since the reason, or the original reason for the hiatus was my PhD, my change to becoming a PhD student. That was the original reason. I should say a little bit more about the PhD. I mean, what am I doing? Now, my PhD is looking at the role of reflection in wisdom development and education in adolescence. Basically, if we get young people to think and reflect about their experiences in certain ways, is that going to, or could that facilitate the development of wisdom? That's what my PhD is looking at. And you might be thinking, well, what is wisdom? What are you talking about? Well, I think lots of schools believe, lots of educators believe that there is more to a good education than just getting good exam results. Ideally, we want young people to grow up into good people who lead flourishing lives. That's why many schools these days have got programs of character education, which are aimed at helping young people, develop the sorts of character traits that could help them flourish beyond just, mere exam results. And you could say that wisdom is the pinnacle of character development. That's one way of thinking about wisdom. So all these different programs of character education, you could say, are all aiming at wisdom. They want young people to grow up to be wise and to lead flourishing lives. Okay, but wisdom's part of that. Still, what is it? What am I talking about? What is wisdom? And that's a really important question. Even more important for my PhD research is, how do you measure wisdom? I want to look at whether reflection can help facilitate wisdom development. But how on earth am I going to answer that question if I can't measure wisdom? Well, that's the first part of my PhD project. I'm going to be looking at developing a measure of adolescent wisdom. So there are loads of different adult measures of wisdom. But currently there are very few, if any, measures of adolescent wisdom. So what I'm doing in the first part of my PhD is I'm adapting an adult version. So I've taken an adult measure and I've rewritten it in more accessible language, and I've tried to make the scenarios in the survey more relatable to younger people. And what I've been doing recently is I've been running workshops with teachers and pastoral leaders across 6 different schools in the Midlands and beyond, getting their feedback on the survey, getting their expertise on whether they think the survey will be accessible to adolescents. And I've also done some pilot testing with small groups of year 7s, year 8s and year 9s to see how they've gotten on. So that's what I've been doing. And the next step of this particular part, this initial part of the PhD, is to get all Key Stage 3 students across multiple schools in the Midlands and beyond to fill in the draft survey, the working version that I'm currently developing. That will generate lots of data. We'll then run statistical tests on that data to see whether the survey, the measure, is working in the ways that you want a measure like this to work. So that's kind of the next stage. That's what I'll do in the new year, the new academic year. So that's what I've been doing on the PhD, among other things, but that's the main kind of thing that I've been focusing on. But this isn't really, I wouldn't say this isn't really a podcast about my PhD. It's not about research, it's about teaching and education. And I want it to remain that way. You know, just because I now spend more of my time doing research related things, I don't want to try and force this into being a PhD or research related podcast. I very much enjoy talking about my teaching experiences, and I'd like to continue doing that. So I've got a couple of things I'd like to discuss today, which no doubt build on previous episodes and things that I've discussed before, and I think that's fine. You know, there are definitely some common threads. Looking back through the episodes earlier, there are definitely some common threads. There are clearly some things I find interesting and enjoy talking about. Now, the first thing, there are 2 things. The first thing, I did an episode quite a while ago called, I believe, let me just check. It was called The Master of Attention. It's called A Master of Attention. It was episode 45. And in that episode, I spoke about a colleague of mine, a teacher who at that time had about 38 years of teaching experience in my school, no less. So maths teaching in my school, 38 years. And he's fantastic. You know, he is just the most brilliant teacher. He's the teacher that we tell all trainees to try and observe teaching. He has a wonderful way of doing what he does. And it's also quite a distinctive way of teaching, quite different to the way in which lots of trainees are taught to teach these days. You know, he was trained to teach in a completely different time. So he's a wonderful teacher. He very much has his own methods, and they're wonderful methods. And in that episode 45, A Master of Attention, I spoke about him because I'd had the privilege of observing his lessons, multiple lessons, and I learnt a great deal. And he had 3 main principles of teaching, 3 main rules that he and his class would follow in his lessons. And they were: listen to one another, think, and have a go. So those were the 3 things. And I spent a whole episode talking about these, episode 45. I'm not going to rehash it now. If you're interested, please go back and listen to that episode 45. I think there's some good stuff in there. So listen, think, and have a go. Well, this colleague of mine, he's just now completed his 40th year at my school and has now finally retired. And towards the end, I had the real privilege of spending quite a bit of time with him and talking to him. We seemed to have quite a lot of frees at the same time, and we'd often occupy the same little intervention room. and we'd sit and have chats about various things. And, I'm always keen to take opportunities to pick his brains. And I asked him, I said, where did these 3 principles come from? How did you arrive at them? They seem to work really well for you. The kids really seem to buy into them. I mean, I haven't seen them written down or spoken about elsewhere, not explicitly anyway. So where did you find these principles? And he told me that he kind of discovered them when he took on additional teaching responsibilities. Well, additional responsibilities beyond teaching. So in his 40 years, he's occupied various posts at my school, including head of year and other pastoral roles. And he said that it was when he first took on these additional responsibilities, he suddenly found that he had very little time to do lesson prep and very little time to think about his teaching, which is, that's scary. That's a scary thought. It's one of the reasons why I have refrained from taking on additional responsibilities, just because I thought that I might become overwhelmed and that my teaching might suffer and it might all become very stressful. And I think he corroborated that, taking on these additional responsibilities meant he had less time to think about his teaching and to do planning, but that forced him, in a way, to become more efficient and to zero in on what really mattered and what really made a difference for his teaching and for his students. And that's how he arrived, eventually, gradually, after many years, at these 3 principles. So they say that, what do they say? Necessity is the mother of invention. I guess it's the same kind of thing here. He no longer had the time to teach inefficiently. He had to zero in on what really mattered. It was a necessity because there were now so many competing demands for his time. And what he found through, I guess, trial and error, were these 3 principles. He landed on them. The kids seemed to respond well. They certainly seemed to work for him. And he would build his lessons around these 3 principles. Listen to one another, think, and have a go. So I guess, what's the moral of this little epilogue? Like I said, I've discussed these 3 principles at length in that earlier episode of the podcast. Here, I'm talking more about how this teacher discovered these 3 principles. And it was because all of a sudden he found himself with far less time. So he had to really zero in on what mattered for his teaching. So I guess the moral of this little epilogue is that taking on additional responsibilities in school may be a scary thought. It may mean that you have less time to think about and plan your lessons, but it will mean also that you will quite quickly zero in on what really makes the difference in your lessons through necessity, if nothing else. So what am I saying? I guess I'm saying, I'm not one to speak because, like I said, I've never taken on any massive additional responsibilities at my school. But I guess what I'm saying is not to be too frightened of it. If I could go back and speak to my former self, who was considering taking on these additional responsibilities, I might say, don't be so afraid. You will have less time, but by having less time, you'll figure out what really matters in your lessons, what really makes a difference. Don't shy away from the additional responsibilities purely because you'll have less time to think about your teaching. It could be a good thing. You might discover 3 of your own principles, which really make all the difference for you and your students. So there you go. Three great principles that have worked really well for a teacher with an enormous amount of experience, and how he came to find them. That was one thing. The other thing I wanted to discuss was body language. So after my year 11 class left this year, I had some free time, and I was paired with one of the newer members of staff to get into their lessons, do some observations, work on some things together, set some targets, etc. Just generally be supportive, which was very, it was very fruitful, I would say. I'd like to hope it was helpful for the member of staff in question. I know that I found it very, very useful. As I've said before on the podcast, I think more about my own teaching when I am observing and discussing teaching with other members of staff. That's when I really, really try to think about what matters and what can make a difference. Anyway, one of the targets we set together was to wait for silence before starting an explanation. And if students stop being silent during the explanation, to stop and wait again, just to ensure that students are quiet, silent, listening before speaking. It's one of the foundation stones of teaching. I really do think it's important. And the question is, well, how do you do that? How do you do it? And there are various things you can do, various ways. But one thing you can do is through body language. Teaching is very performative. You need to ensure that your facial expressions and your body language are very expressive. This might not come naturally to you. It doesn't come naturally to me. I think it's something I've kind of picked up over the years. I've become a bit more of a performer. So if you're not happy with some behaviour in your lessons, that unhappiness should be written clearly all over your face and in your body language. And if that's clear to students, then the body language might be sufficient to address the issue and to get students back on track. If you're a bit harder to read, then students might quite not know where they stand in relation to you. They might have just pushed the boundaries a little bit. They might have just sliced an extra bit of salami. They're pushing their luck. They're being cheeky. And you might be annoyed. You might not be happy with that behaviour. But if it isn't clear, if that unhappiness isn't written all over your face and your body language, then students might think they've gotten away with it. Okay? Or at least it might mean that you have to verbalise your dissatisfaction or find some other way to express it. Whereas if your body language is really expressive, you can sometimes get away with just a look or just a gesture, and that might be enough to sort out the behavioural issue, or in this case, to make sure students are silent before you deliver your explanation. So this was something we were working on together. What sorts of body language could the teacher in question use to try and ensure, to try to communicate to students without saying a word that he's waiting. A big performance. Oh, I'm waiting. Big clear performance. And it reminded me of how I discovered this. It's not a trick. How I discovered this particular strategy. It was during my very first year with one of my very first classes, a year 7 class, and they were a bit wild. In fact, that year group has just finished in year 11 now. So I've seen one year group all the way through from year 7 to year 11, and they've just finished. And some of them were a bit wild, a bit of a crazy class, okay, a bit intimidating for a new teacher, but I learned a lot with them. But on one occasion, I knew back then it was important for students to be silent before I delivered my explanation. I think I'm also far more sensitive to noise than a lot of teachers. So if students are talking or mumbling while I am, it distracts me actually, and I kind of lose the thread. So even for my own, benefit, I like students to be silent and listen. And I'd tried everything at that point. I think I'd tried sanctions, I'd tried rewards, I'd tried explaining why it was important to be silent, etc. I'd gone round in circles. I'd done all these things multiple times. And on this occasion, I think I was just exasperated. I was really, genuinely exasperated. And I think I kind of almost slumped against the wall and just kind of folded my arms, did a big sigh, shook my head, looked exasperated, disappointed, frustrated, probably looked like I wanted to be somewhere else. And what did the class do? They went silent. They could see from my body language, perhaps more clearly and more loudly than words could ever convey, they could see that I wasn't happy. And I think it was in that moment that I learned the power of expressive, performative body language in front of students. So when waiting for students to be silent, you need to put on a fantastic performance of someone who's waiting. You know, someone who's been at a bus stop for half an hour, they're really annoyed, they're late, they're checking their watch, you know, they're huffing and puffing, they're sighing, they're rolling their eyes, walking backwards and forwards, arms crossed, okay, big frown across the face, whatever it might be, okay? There are lots of ways to really express with your body and your expressions that you are, you know, not happy with what's happening and that you're waiting for something. You know, you're waiting for silence, okay? And it speaks 1,000 words, okay? You can, I'm not saying this works straight away. I mean, I kind of stumbled into it, like I said, with this Year 7 class many years ago. But it certainly takes practice and perfection. I've never done this, but I can imagine it might almost be useful to do it in front of a mirror. Okay? Practice these kind of performances in front of a mirror. Okay? It can make a big difference. So yes, the importance of the power, I think, of body language and facial expressions to communicate how you're feeling and your dissatisfaction, or, you know, communicate the fact that your patients might be wearing thin in the classroom in order to get that message across to students. And I should say as well, it's equally true on the positive side. When you're happy, make a song and a dance about it, okay? You might not have to actually sing or dance, although the kids might enjoy that, but really it should be effusive, okay? You know, just as you would really want your face and your body to express when you're displeased, it should be the same, maybe even more so when you're happy. Okay, big smiles, okay, wide eyes, okay, big gestures, okay, modulate, change the tone, sound of your voice, you know, just dial everything up. I mean, I think we do these things naturally anyway. It's not like learning a whole new language. I think we do these things naturally anyway. You just need to kind of exaggerate these things sometimes with teenagers and children. Turn it up to the max. Imagine you're on a stage, okay, and try to convey how you're feeling through your facial expressions, through your body language, and it can achieve an awful lot. I really do believe it can achieve an awful lot. Okay, so those are two things I wanted to discuss today. Nothing too groundbreaking, but I wanted to get back into the habit of producing a podcast. I don't plan to produce episodes as frequently as I did before. When I was a full-time teacher, I felt I had lots to discuss and I was producing an episode every 2 weeks. I'm now doing 1/4 as much teaching as I did before, so I think I might try to post an episode 1/4 as often. So what would that mean? Used to do it every 2 weeks. Maybe now I'll do it every 8 weeks, okay, or every 2 months. I'll try to get an episode out every 2 months or so. But I would like to get back into the habit of it. I do enjoy it. My students were asking me, "Sir, when's the next episode of the podcast coming?" So here it is. And we'll talk again soon. Something I've forgotten to do, though, is the Patreon plea. Okay? So, see if I can remember it. This episode took a few hours to produce. If you think that work is worth at least the price of a coffee, so £2 or £3 once a month, then please consider signing up on the Patreon. and making that contribution. If you do that, it helps me cover the cost of producing the podcast. It doesn't cost lots to produce a podcast, but any contribution is greatly appreciated. And if you do sign up on the Patreon, you get exclusive early access to videos of my recording sessions. Okay? Good. So, I hope you enjoyed the episode, and we'll talk again soon. If you enjoyed this episode, please spread the word in person and on social media. You can follow me on Twitter at Mr. BrownPod or email mrbrownpod@gmail.com. Please subscribe, rate and review in your directory of choice. Please also consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/Mr. BrownPod and helping me cover the cost of producing the podcast. Thank you, and talk again soon.